Start spreading the news. You're leaving today. I want to be a part of it. New York, New York. It's up to you. New York, New York. Mic check. How we sounding out there? What's happening, live chat? Well. Let's bring that background music down a little bit here. How we feeling? December 25th, live stream. Gonna keep it nice and casual today. Nice and informal. Talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. Boxing, movies, whatever. Music, life, you know? A nice casual show. Easy going. We got Nick in the place. We got Anthony YouTube. We've got the Hideout. George the Last Patriot. We've got Vizio. He says, I hear whistling. Not sure what the whistling is. Ocean Blue says, happy Saturnalia. Indeed, happy Saturnalia. King Maverick says, big shout out to Turkey. If it wasn't for him, Fury would have ducked Usyk. Indeed, he would have. There was a clip that somebody posted in my Element group the other day. In fact, did they post it in my Element group? Or I think I saw it on my Instagram feed. It's a clip of an interview with Tyson Fury in 2020. Basically saying that he's got no interest in fighting Oleksandr Usyk because Usyk is outside of the Anglosphere. This is what Tyson Fury says. He doesn't speak English. Nobody wants to watch him. I'm not interested in fighting him. Of course, he'd moved up to heavyweight, right? And Fury was already then looking to try and avoid him. Ocean Blue says, not that I celebrate, and me neither. But, you know, for the people who know, they know exactly what it is people are celebrating this time of year. Unbeknownst to them. Punch Quote says, crazy people cry about the boxers in lower divisions, but you have a heavyweight who can't crack an egg. And he is some kind of god, even though he has BS his way out of 4 defeats. You can't make this stuff up. Shout out to Ryan Hutchinson. AJ Sagar says, just imagine if Fury had won. He would never have fought Usyk again. And if he did, it would have asked for 200 million at least. Okay, somebody asking, are you guys on the EastEnders Christmas special? I don't watch EastEnders, bro. Shout out to M88 Boy. Yes, smash that like button, folks. Help me out here. Should have at least 140 likes. We got 91. You guys can just stick a like on there. I'm going to get to a super chat here. Okay, so we've got Gareth Tilley, who is a raving imbecile, idiot, agenda-pushing donut. So let's get you out of here because you're an idiot. and you're trying to project nonsense onto me, which is completely untrue. You're obviously some salty Fury fan or some other idiot. Let's get you out of here, fool. Enjoy your miserable life. Gareth Tilly, the fool. The chickens came home to roost. Indeed, they did. Tommy G says, Hatman enjoyed his whiskey and Christmas dinner. I don't drink, nor do I celebrate Christmas. So, appreciate the words anyway. Shout out to G-Man. Okay, shout out to is it Xerxes? Is that how you pronounce it? Shout out for the super chat. He says he was a good guy that completed boxing in the end. Subscribed since 2015. Yeah, it's not often that happens. Boxing is full of so many snakes, charlatans, con men, that just by their sheer numbers, they're normally the ones who end up on top. So yeah, Usyk is a rarity in that sense because he conducts himself with dignity. The way he refuses to speak ill of people who have messed him about, dragged his name through the mud, disrespected him, and so on, is quite incredible, to be honest with you, because he had every right. He would have been well within his rights, as I said in a recent video, to go in on AJ. You know, when AJ threw the tantrum in the ring and threw the belts out of the ring, he could have gone in on AJ then. He didn't. He basically urged the public to be sympathetic towards him and said he's a good man. And he was even more disrespected by Tyson Fury over the course of 2 years or more. Beat Tyson Fury twice. Fury continues to slag him off, give him no credit, downplay his ability, claim that he won by a wide margin in both fights. Usyk will be well within his rights once again to go in on Luke Partridge, but he doesn't. Somehow he rises above it, tells people that Tyson Fury's a good... I mean, it's incredible that he's got that type of patience. Again, maybe he's thinking about his religion, turn the other cheek. When your enemy does something to you, you pray for them and whatever. Some people take that religion stuff quite seriously, and maybe he does. Tyson Fury certainly doesn't. That's for sure. He definitely don't take it seriously. It's all just PR for him. Shade says, did you watch the Superman trailer? Nah, I'm not into comic book films. The only comic book films I've liked have been the Nolan Batman films, and actually the most recent Batman film, I forget the director, starring Robert Pattinson. That was halfway decent. I certainly liked the cinematography, and the art style of the film was very impressive. And of course, the Penguin was very good. I saw the Penguin series as well. Star Fox says, no Fury roast on Christmas Day. He's a bit of a, you know, he's a bit too big to be a turkey. Shout out to Fight Sport Talk. And for those who haven't heard me talk about Tyson Fury before, I want to make sure people are clear on my stance. I've never said Tyson Fury's a bad fighter. I think he's a very good fighter. Publicly known as Tyson Fury, we call him Luke Partridge. He's a very, very good fighter, very talented, but his fans, which includes the majority of the British media, just went way overboard in how good they thought he was, giving him accolades he hadn't earned and so on. And the thing about Tyson Fury, Luke Partridge, is that he isn't cut from the same cloth as some of the fighters that he claims to spiritually descend from. You know, the Muhammad Alis of the world and so on. Because they were guys who would fight all comers. They wouldn't mess about, lie, gaslight the public, tell you they're going to fight them and then kick the can down the road, pull out of fights after signing for them, then blame the other guy for the... Guys like Muhammad Ali didn't do that. Larry Holmes, Lennox Lewis, you know, the people who he puts himself in the same bracket as, they didn't behave like that. And of course, Oleksandr Usyk doesn't behave like that. So it was important for the heavyweight division that a fighter like Oleksandr Usyk, it didn't have to be him, because there were other fighters willing to walk that path, but they just weren't good enough. Oleksandr Usyk was good enough to walk the path of the old school, taking on all comers, not trying to avoid fights or delay fights, not trying to deceive the public, not trying to price yourself out and do all this foolish carry on. So it's a relief that Oleksandr Usyk has completed boxing and that we now move into this new era with a spring in our step for the heavyweight division. I'm very excited about young Moses Atalma and how far he could go. You got danger men out there still, like Martin Bakole. We'll see the comeback of Filip Hrgović if it happens. You've got amateur stars on the way up like Bakadir Jalilov, who's got a hell of a left hand. You've got Richard Torres Jr., although not too sure about him. He is an Olympian. Obviously, he was a high-level amateur. But they're moving him very, very slow. Can Jared Anderson come back? We'll see. We've got Fabio Wardley, who's a bit of a wild card in the heavyweight division. You've got a dark horse in Ajit Kabayel. So it's an interesting mix on the way up, and people might not be so excited about these names yet. But I remember the start of the current heavyweight era, when AJ had just turned over. He was nowhere near a heavyweight title at that point. Tyson Fury was, you know, fighting on obscure small hall shows. Vladimir Klitschko was still reigning supreme. Deontay Wilder was, again, fighting obscure hillbillies and what have you. And in terms of the personalities, Dillian Whyte was unknown, even to most of the British public. Derek Chisora was known, but again, he hadn't become the institution at that stage that he would go on to become. So, yeah, the characters, the personalities weren't really there at the start of this current era. It took a while for them to develop. As fighters get older, they get more comfortable on camera. They understand their character, you know, their public persona a bit better and what works for them. And that's when we get the personalities, the characters coming through. So I'm very hopeful for this new era of heavyweight boxing, particularly Moses Atalma. He needs to keep his feet on the ground. I think he's got all the talent in the world. Shout out to Ricky Torres for the super chat. He says, what do you think of Frank never giving Usyk credit? Well, that's what you would expect from the promoter of Tyson Fury. See, this is the thing about Tyson Fury. Because he's so devious, because he's so dishonest, the people who work for him basically have to be dishonest as well, even if they weren't that way inclined naturally. And I struggle to believe they aren't, most of them, but even if they weren't, even if they were naturally more honest people, in order to do a job for the guy, you're going to have to co-sign his lies and his BS, right? So he just drags everybody down into his nonsense. If he tells a lie, then every member in his team has to tell the same lie and propagate the same lie. That's how it goes. Thank you, Shades. Matt Reeves directed that Batman movie. Yeah, it was a pretty good movie. Particularly the Colin Farrell Penguin character, which is really good. Nikita says, hey, Hatman, what is the next step for Tyson Fury in your opinion? You love your content. Always nice to hear the voice of reason. You know, thank you for the question. It's a good one. And I would say that my feelings about Tyson Fury's next move are similar to my feelings regarding Deontay Wilder's next move following his third defeat to Tyson Fury. And so when Wilder, should I say, lost to Fury for the third time, in my head I was thinking, well, on one hand, I do want to see Deontay Wilder fight again because he's a very exciting heavyweight. And there are lots of interesting matchups he could be in. But at the same time, because Deontay Wilder acted such a fool when he was champion, you know, he messed around so much and avoided so many fights. He was so coddled and obviously turned down the DAZN deal to fight AJ. I was concerned about him getting a title shot without earning it, because we know what he's like when he's got a belt around his waist. All the messing about, all the avoiding fights, all the being coddled. So it was kind of mixed feelings. Again, on one hand, I wanted to see Wilder carry on. I wanted to see him in some good fights, but only if he could be in there against some contenders and earn his title shot, which he did try to do, thankfully. Didn't work out for him, but we as fans got to see him in some fights against fellow contenders. So that's all I could have hoped for. It turned out the way I wanted it to with Wilder. Not necessarily him losing, but just him having to fight his way to title contention against tough opposition. And so I would say the same for Tyson Fury. He's a very talented fighter. It's just a shame about his personality where he's always looking to pull the wool over people's eyes. And when he's in a position of power, he's able to do that and get away with it a lot of the time. Now that he's just another contender, I hope, if he decides to carry on boxing, that he is forced to fight his way back to the top against dangerous opposition. Not cherry-picked opposition, dangerous fighters, so we can see him in there in good fights. I'd like to see Tyson Fury versus Martin Bakole. Yeah, I'd like to see Tyson Fury versus Zheli Zhang. I'd like to see Tyson Fury versus, even Ajit Kabayel. I'd certainly like to see Tyson Fury versus Bakadir Jalilov. Love to see that fight. So if we can put him in that mix. Now, obviously, a lot of people are talking about Fury versus AJ. That's a viable fight now because both guys are coming off losses. Although Tyson Fury's coming off a loss where he was competitive and he didn't get, knocked around the ring. AJ's coming off a devastating KO defeat. So AJ's loss is far worse than the one Fury's coming off. But still, if they can put that fight together, it kind of does make sense as a crossroads fight. Last chance saloon, certainly for AJ, but to some extent for Fury as well. I just don't know whether Fury will be up for that fight right now. I think his mind will be scrambled by the fact he's been beaten by Usyk twice. And he's not the best heavyweight in the world, the way he's been running around claiming over the past few years. The public have seen it now. You see, Fury can delude himself all he wants and convince himself that he won both fights and he was robbed. But he knows that the public don't believe that. And Tyson Fury always wanted public adulation. Well, the public don't think that he's the best heavyweight in the world anymore. Even his supporters in the media, like Gareth A. Davis, are saying that Usyk won both fights, fair and square. So, yeah, he's going to be a bit fried at the moment, mentally. And I don't know whether he will be particularly keen on returning to the ring in the near future. We'll see. But if he can get his mind together, then maybe he will think of the AJ fight as the best next step for him. And the interesting thing is, Oleksandr Usyk has been asked, even in the wake of his second victory over Tyson Fury, who he thinks would win between Fury and AJ. And he keeps saying that he thinks AJ will win, which is surprising to me. I mean, Usyk was there, right? He was ringside when AJ got smashed to bits by Daniel Dubois. But maybe Usyk is looking at it from a styles make fights perspective and he's thinking, nah, just because AJ got smashed to bits in the fight against Dubois, I've been in with both of them, AJ and Dubois, and it just wasn't a good stylistic matchup for AJ, but I've also been in the ring with Fury, and I think AJ would fare much better with him. Perhaps that's what Usyk has on his mind. Who knows? But I find it interesting that he's still picking AJ to beat Fury. Adam Hurley says AJ didn't even look bad in the Dubois fight. Dubois was just a beast. AJ's not done. Can't say I agree. Can't say I agree. The defensive mistakes that AJ made in that fight were absolutely terrible. And it's not like he just made one mistake once or different mistakes on different occasions. No, he made the same mistake multiple times and got punished for it multiple times. The inability to correct that mistake, shocking from AJ. A guy at his stage of that stage of his career with that much experience to be making mistakes like that, it doesn't bode well. And then to get knocked out the way he did, to take all the punishment and get knocked out the way he did. We know that AJ is not as mentally solid as some of the other heavyweights out there. We know that. We knew that going into the Dubois fight. Now that he's been knocked out in such brutal fashion, what do you think that's going to do to his psyche? What do you think that's going to do to his punch resistance? Personally, I think AJ's done. I think he's cooked. I think he should retire, to be honest. But if he insists on carrying on, I'd say he should go for the Dillian Whyte fight, the Wilder fight, Fury fight maybe, which is more dangerous than the previous two I've mentioned. Shout out to Workstation for the super chat. He says, Luke Partridge, great boxer, exaggerated champion. 100% agree. Very talented fighter, Luke Partridge. Tyson Fury, very talented, but you know, a very problematic personality. Let's just put it that way. Shout out to the Truth channel. It's big up Hatman, Breath of Fresh Air, great channel. Thank you, sir. Shout out to Chili Beef in the chat. He says, big up Hatman, good conquered evil. Indeed. Black Dynamite says, Ben Davison fanboy behavior still shocks me. Yeah. And that's another thing. If AJ does decide to get in the ring with Fury, he can't have Ben Davis in his corner. There's a conflict of interest there. You can't have Brill, Cream, Ben, Vidal Sassoon Tyson Fury fanboy number one, right? Gypsy King cult member. Still, even now, you can't have him in AJ's corner if AJ's going to fight Fury. I mean, Brill Cream Ben will probably tell AJ to go out there and, you know, tell him to make a bunch of mistakes. Obviously, he'll sell them to AJ as good advice, but he's working in the best interest of Tyson Fury. So we got another Tyson Fury fanboy here. He says, I get it, Hatman, you resent Fury for whatever reason, but why not keep it professional every now and then? Why not tell Tyson Fury to keep it professional? How about that? How about we start there? He's just been beaten twice, and he's given the guy, Oleksandr Usyk, no credit whatsoever. So rather than you come at me, idiot, how about we tell Tyson Fury to keep it professional? Who has a more negative impact on boxing, me or Tyson Fury? It's not even close. If you were a real boxing fan, you would be saying the same things about Tyson Fury that I've been saying, because I care about the good of the sport. And when lies are spreading around in boxing, masquerading as truth, and the media are propagating the lies, and many fans are believing the lies, that's a problem. But obviously to you, it's not a problem, is it? So, says a lot about you. Mike Brown says, AJ is done. I don't care what anyone says. I agree. AJ just doesn't have it mentally to succeed at the upper levels in the heavyweight division long term. He just doesn't have it. He's just not built like that psychologically. He's had all the time to rebuild and get his mind together and what have you, but he just doesn't have it. He just doesn't have it. And so, yeah, even though AJ has some advantages over Fury, just as Fury has some advantages over him, if they were to fight next, I'm picking Tyson Fury by knockout. I pick him to knock AJ out, personally. I mean, look, AJ may have a chance. He can punch. He's got history with Fury when they sparred back in the days and all that. Maybe he would feel more confident against Fury than other fight. I don't know. But if you're asking me, if they were to make that fight, I'd be picking Tyson Fury to win by knockout. Shout out to Rich Piana for the super chat. He says, Hatman, please bring back fantasy matchups. Shout out to you for the super chat. Ricky Torres, shout out again for the super chat. He says, Ben told Fury he had him winning in the locker room. Yeah, I saw that. Ben Davison is a proper panda bear, you know, pandering. Frankie Coffee Cake says, Fury is more evil than Edwin Valero. I wouldn't go that far. If you know what crimes Valero committed, I wouldn't go that far. But he's certainly a very negative influence in the sport of boxing. Outside the ring, don't know, don't care. But in the ring or in the arena of boxing, a very negative influence, Tyson Fury. Shout out to Mohammed for the super chat. He says, I know you and others say it's best if Usyk retires on top. Is he your GOAT at the moment? And if not, what can he do from now on to become your GOAT? Well, as I've explained in other live streams and videos, when I'm ranking any fighter on the all-time great list, I primarily base it on their resume. I don't base it so much on whether I think they could beat various other fighters from history, because that's too opinion-based. It's too subjective. So while I might think that Usyk could beat whoever, Larry Holmes or Muhammad Ali, in a fantasy matchup, I'm not going to rank him above them in the all-time great list because he doesn't have the resume that those guys have. He doesn't have the longevity. And the reason that longevity is important is because styles make fights. You need to see a fighter against a plethora of different styles at the top, at the highest level in world title fights. And then you can get a better gauge over how good this fighter was. You know, when you see them over the long haul. Muhammad Ali had over 20 world title fights. Joe Louis had over 20 world title fights. Lennox Lewis had 17. I mean, even the Klitschko's, they had an awful lot of world title fights. Can I really put Usyk above all those guys in the all-time heavyweight rankings? Larry Holmes, of course, had a lot of world title fights. I can't put him above those guys in terms of resume. He doesn't have the depth of resume to match those other fighters. As talented as he is, as well as I think he might do in a fantasy matchup against those guys, he just doesn't have the depth of resume because, of course, half of his career, more than half of his career, was fought at cruiserweight. Maybe if he turned pro at heavyweight from day one, he could have had a resume to match or surpass many of those guys, but he doesn't. He chose to turn pro at cruiserweight, did things that way. And so his resume at heavyweight is what it is. It's good, but it's not like, you know, top 5 of all time good. Now, could he build a resume like that? Anything is possible, I guess, but he's 38 in January. I don't think he has enough time to build a resume like that, personally. I can't see it. And if he decides to try, and he might, because he's that type of character, I suspect it will go wrong for him. I suspect it will backfire. I think he has reached the point of diminishing returns now. I think this is as good as it will get for Oleksandr Usyk, considering his age, considering the fact he's a small heavyweight in a land of giants and all these guys can punch. There's a lot of young guys coming up. I think if he were to retire now, people will always make the argument that he could be a top 5 heavyweight because he never lost, right? When a guy's never lost, you can always, or there will always be people that say, well, he never lost, so you can't say he would have been beaten by this guy or that guy from history because nobody was able to do it during his time. Also, there's the fact that the cruiserweights that Oleksandr Usyk fought were really the same size as, let's say, the heavyweights of the 1970s, 60s, even up until maybe the mid-80s. Very similar size. You look at George Foreman when he fought Muhammad Ali, what was he, 218 pounds, 217? Actually lighter than Usyk. These cruiserweights that Usyk fought were in the ring at least 210 pounds. Some of them closer to 220. So again, that's an argument that people could use to bolster Usyk's case for being, let's say, a top 5 heavyweight of all time. You see? But as soon as he starts taking losses, he's not going to be thought of as highly as a heavyweight, in my view. Yeah, I mean, I might think of him as highly because I don't think Usyk is at his best anymore. But the public sees someone very differently when they've seen them lose. And unless you're going to be able to come back and avenge all your defeats, then you're always going to have that black mark against your name. So I think Usyk should retire right now. I don't think he should push the envelope any more than he's pushed it. He's already pushed it very, very far. Okay, Frank says Usyk could go to cruiserweight. He has said he has to put on a lot of bulk for these heavyweight fights and force feed himself. So that tells me he is still a cruiserweight naturally. Yeah, I don't think that's a good idea either. Because whenever we've seen fighters do that in the past, you know, when they've moved up a weight, and campaign there for a number of years and then try to move back down again, it usually goes horribly wrong. So I wouldn't want to see Usyk do that. You know, move back down to cruiserweight and fight Geopolitics. I don't see what the reason would be for him to do that from a legacy perspective. I mean, okay, nobody's ever done it before. They never moved from cruiserweight, gone heavyweight, then come back down to cruiserweight. But I don't know. I don't think it adds that much to his legacy personally. Because how many people are going to be able to become undisputed cruiserweight and undisputed heavyweight champion in the land of the giants? I don't think that many. I don't think we'll see that for a very, very long time again. Deep Random Thinker said, absolutely disgusting how how Fury and his team have treated Usyk by insulting him with the name calling and disrespecting his religious beliefs by not allowing him to bring his cross crucifix into the ring. Yeah, some people had assumed that that was some issue with the Saudis, you know, because it's an Islamic country, so they don't want the symbols of other religions being shown, but they allowed him his crucifix in the first fight, right? Presumably, it was because of this silly rumor that was concocted by, demented Tyson Fury fans and perpetuated, perhaps by the Fury team themselves, that Usyk had some type of substance on the crucifix in the corner in the first fight, and that allowed him to get a second wind and, all this carry on. So I suspect that's why they didn't want Usyk having his crucifix in the ring. You know what the Fury team are like. The Frank Warrens and the Spencer Browns and all these people. Awful. In the end, it didn't matter. And this is why I had to pick Usyk to win again, because I just felt like the Fury and his team, they're too desperate, If you're going to beat Usyk, you're not going to beat him with all these little gimmicks and mind games and underhanded backstage tactics. That's not how you beat a guy like that. This is somebody that had over 300 amateur fights. This is a guy who's fought on the road his whole career in people's backyards, when he won the WSB at cruiserweight. So you don't beat a guy like that. He thrives off being the B-side. You don't beat a guy with all that carry on. So the more that Fury and Warren and Spencer Brown and all those horrible creatures on that side of the street were trying their underhanded methods, the more power they were giving Usyk psychologically. That's the way I saw it. And they were actually depleting themselves. They still don't understand that principle, that psychological principle, but that's what I think was going on. And at this level of the game, the elite level, every little thing counts. Every little thing helps. So don't deplete yourself psychologically by trying to constantly get one over on your opponent who's far too experienced to fall for any of that stuff anyway. Shout out to Errol for the super chat. He says, what are your thoughts on Simon Jordan putting Fury's loss to Usyk basically down to having the wrong ring walk music? Well, I didn't hear him mention that. But I'm not surprised, Simon Jordan seems to be going to the most ridiculous lengths to avoid giving Usyk credit. I actually heard him say for the first time, maybe these heavyweights, not just Fury, he doesn't want to narrow it down to Fury. He says maybe these heavyweights, this current crop of heavyweights aren't very good because they should be beating Usyk, or Fury specifically should be beating Usyk. Again, he doesn't really understand how good Usyk is. So somebody there in the live chat said that Ali would beat Usyk. Ali was a great fighter. He's got a better heavyweight resume than Oleksandr Usyk, no question about it, because it's deeper. But in a stylistic matchup, in a fantasy matchup, as I said the other day, I'd personally pick Usyk to beat Ali. Have you seen the Muhammad Ali-Carl Mittlenberger fight? That's the only time I've seen Ali fight a southpaw. German southpaw in the 1960s, Ali in his prime. You go watch the Mittlenberger fight. After watching that fight, you then come back to me and tell me if you still think Ali would beat Oleksandr Usyk. Personally, I don't. I think that's the wrong style for Ali. A deep random thinker says, Usyk beat the boxing establishment for the sake of boxing integrity and real boxing fans and boxing history. That's exactly what he did. Yeah, as far as the ring walk music, wow. Star Fox said, yeah, Simon Jordan said Mariah Carey was a factor. The Truth Channel said Ali struggled a little, even with Joe Bugner and Henry Cooper. Well, yeah, Henry Cooper in the first fight. Joe Bugner was much later on in his career when Ali was past his best, really. And of course, that's part of the reason that we give Ali so much credit, because some of his best wins were when he was way past his sell-by date in the 1970s. That wasn't prime Ali. He didn't have his legs anymore, and his legs were his greatest asset. Be that as it may, as I said earlier on, from a stylistic perspective, when Ali fought Carl Mittlenberger, the German southpaw, he found it very awkward in there. And if you're finding it awkward against Carl Mittlenberger, God help you if you fight Oleksandr Usyk, right? Now, other people would argue, well, there weren't a lot of southpaws for Ali to spar with back then. If you put a prime Ali in a time machine and brought him to the year 2024, 2025, he'd have loads more southpaw sparring. He could adapt to it more. The training methods are better today. The nutrition is better and so on. This is what some people will claim. I'm not saying I necessarily agree. And therefore, if you account for all those things, then Ali still gets the win over Usyk. Well, look, it's all opinions at the end of the day. It's a fantasy matchup that can never happen, will never happen. But for whatever it's worth, if it could, I'd be picking Usyk in that fight. I just don't think it's a good style for Ali. I think there are other fighters who Ali would fare better against than maybe Usyk would. Boxing is rock, paper, scissors. And again, in terms of resume, you definitely got to rank Ali higher than Usyk because he's just got a much longer CV. You know, he's got much more names in the win column at world level in the heavyweight division. SUV fella says, Fury had a lot of fanboys in America developing as well. The MMA crowd, Brendan Schwab was terrible. Yes, indeed they were. Brendan Schwab, The Undertaker, Sylvester Stallone, you know, all these characters. These are the ones who were saying he was the greatest heavyweight of all time after he beat Dylan White. I mean, good God, man. Talk about going overboard. What a shocker. Mohammed says, well, Mohammed Imad Bruce Lee says, Hatman, do you think Chisora just gave Usyk a tough night when he was new to the weight? Or do you think Usyk maybe did just enough to win in order to not spook AJ and his team? We know the politics. I don't think it was either of those things, personally. I just think that it was a stylistic thing. Boxing is chess, it's not checkers. Styles make fights. Derek Chisora was willing to gamble against Oleksandr Usyk in a way that no other heavyweight that Usyk has faced has. He came out the blocks like a bull in a china shop. He threw caution to the wind and decided, you know what? I'm just going to swing at this guy. I'm going to rush him. I don't care if my shots miss or if the first shot misses, the second shot will miss. I'm going to try and hit him wherever I can hit him. I'm going to fully commit to attack. And Derek Chisora is a short heavyweight, so he was able to come underneath a lot of Usyk's punches. He's a couple inches shorter than him. And that's more awkward. He's got, Derek Chisora's got a short neck. And when he tucks up tight, he's a more difficult target than a 6'8" Tyson Fury or a 6'6" Anthony Joshua or a Daniel Dubois who's 6'5". Do you see what I'm saying? So I just think it was a stylistic thing. And that's why I say Derek Chisora laid the blueprint for how to beat Usyk, in my opinion. He just wasn't able to sustain those type of attacks over the course of 12 rounds. But if you get a more talented heavyweight in there, a big guy who can punch, who's willing to just go all out and risk getting chinned in pursuit of a knockout, I think that's the way you do it. At least against prime Usyk. As Usyk gets older, there might be other ways to beat him, but against the prime version of Usyk, I think you just got to rush him. You're never going to outbox him. You have to commit to trying to knock this guy out or seriously damage him, get several knockdowns in the first half of the fight. And that's what Chisora did. That's why he gave Usyk so many problems, because he was absolutely 100% committed to knocking him out early. And Usyk wasn't ready. He wasn't used to that. He wasn't accustomed to a 250-pound man, 6'1", who comes in low, rushing at him like that. And to this day, Usyk says that Chisora hit him harder than any other heavyweight he's been in with because of that forward momentum. Chisora hit Usyk in the chest a couple times early in the fight, and literally, you could see Usyk's whole body shudder from the weight of the shot. Shout out to Ocean Blue for the super chat. Yes, the Stallone impression. Stallone, it always amazes me with Sylvester Stallone. He acts like he was a real boxer or something. Have you heard this guy talk about boxing? Somebody needs to tell him that the Rocky movies were not real, because he talks about boxing. I remember when he did the Contender series. You guys remember the Contender? I think he was on at least the first season of the Contender, maybe the second season as well. And he was giving advice to the boxers who were on there as if he was a veteran boxer. I never boxed a day in his life. Getting carried away by, thinking that he is Rocky Balboa. Incredible. I've always thought Stallone's a donut in that way, He's made some pretty good films, but yeah. He needs to chill on thinking that he's a real boxer. Reality's Awakened now says, Moses Itauma does look like the real deal, but I think McKean isn't that good. Hrgovic is not the same fighter after his father's death, so I think McKean is overhyped. AJ and Triple D would knock him out. Okay, I can't say that that's an unreasonable comment. I don't necessarily agree, but it's definitely not an unreasonable comment. So... Someone calling themselves Luke Dyson Partridge in the comments. As Usyk is better than me, I admit it. I took your advice, gave Usyk credit, now give me credit, please. I want to see you do that on camera. J.A. says Itauma would spark AJ. I agree. I agree. I think Atama would knock Anthony Joshua out. Quite early as well. I think he'd knock him out early right now. I know it's a bold prediction given Atama's age and inexperience, but that's just what I see. I think he's got the confidence. I think he's audacious enough. I think he's technically good enough. And I think AJ is so vulnerable now, mentally, physically, in terms of his punch resistance. I just see a young Atama going in there, you know, hitting AJ with a few feints. I mean, AJ is so hesitant when he's got somebody young and aggressive in front of him. I see Atama hitting him with a few feints. AJ making a mistake and then getting clapped by that southpaw backhand. Atama is a lot faster than Daniel Dubois, folks. So if you thought Atama looked fast on the trigger against AJ, you don't even want to imagine what Atama would look like against AJ in terms of speed. 19 years old. Can you imagine how fast his reflexes are compared to a 35-year-old? In my opinion, he claps AJ in a couple rounds. Fight done. Shout out to 1-1. Big up every time. Yeah, Atama is extremely quick for a heavyweight. And the thing is, Atama has got several gears and he doesn't always show them. So the shots he hit McKean with were fast. I was watching Dwyer's post-fight video where he was talking about McKean. But Dwyer, I don't think, has seen all of Atama's fights, because there were a couple of fights where Atama went into what I think is his highest gear when he was opening up completely with reckless abandon combinations, and the hand speed was absolutely insane. The way the shots were coming out was incredible. And I said at the time, he's got quicker hand speed than Andy Ruiz. Oh yes, he does. Faster hand speed than Ruiz, Joseph Parker, or any of these other heavyweights when he goes into his highest gear. Incredible speed. As I say, I don't think Dwyer has seen that gear yet. But when Atama's in top gear, crazy. Triple R says, always preferred Arnold over Stallone. Yeah, me too. Even though technically Stallone's probably a better actor from a technical perspective, but Arnie was always a more fun character. You know, he was always just a more fun character with his one-liners and all that kind of stuff. I guess Arnie's a pretty good physical actor to some extent, but certainly earlier on in his career was very wooden. It took a while for him to loosen up a bit, you know, but yeah, I always preferred Arnie movies and Arnie as a character in his movies and whatnot over Stallone, for sure. Copezilla says Atama will clean the division out. It will be dead soon. Easy division when Fury, Usyk, and AJ retire. I don't necessarily agree, but time will tell. I personally think it's going to be a really good division. The rivalries between Fury and Wilder, AJ, Fury, Usyk, and everybody in the mix are still very fresh in people's minds, and all the energy that people have invested into talking about these rivalries and debating these rivalries. But when the new rivalries emerge, I don't think people will hold on to the old era for too long, especially the younger crowd. You know, we're in a different day and time now. When I was coming up, there was no internet. And because of that, the shadow of a previous era would linger for longer. You understand what I'm saying? Because the journalists were all still talking about the fighters of the previous era. The public was still only familiar with the fighters of the previous era because information didn't travel as fast back then in the pre-internet days. But now we're in the not just internet age, but social media age where somebody can become a star overnight. I mean, look at Ben Whittaker. We know it's all gone wrong for him lately after the Liam Cameron fight, but he was able to garner an enormous following in a very short space of time, having fought nobody. That's the era we live in. And taking that into consideration, I think that the new stars for the new era of heavyweight boxing can be built very quickly and will be built very quickly, and people will take an interest because, you know, at Talma, 19 years of age, young people have energy. Young people, when they latch onto particular sportsmen, they're going to drive the market. They're going to drive the interest. And when they see one of their own, a guy of just 19 about to turn 20, doing such big things, I think Atama is going to be a star, to be honest. And, you know, people of my generation, maybe some of you guys might look at Atama as, you know, being a bit monotone and not that interesting, but that's what a lot of the youngsters are like nowadays. That's how a lot of the youngsters talk. So although I might not be able to relate to his personality and many of you might not be able to relate to it, trust me, a lot of these youngsters do relate to it because they talk and behave just the same way. In this kind of sleepy, monotone type fashion. A lot of youngsters talk like that. So they'll see him as one of their own. Shout out to Workstation for the super chat. He says, Stallone sparred Duran once and now believes he's actually Rocky. Indeed. In fact, I was reading a story on Instagram where it was claimed that Stallone wanted to spar Dolph Lundgren for real, or wanted to fight Dolph Lundgren for real in a boxing ring when they were filming Rocky IV. And so Dolph Lundgren agreed, and Stallone ended up in hospital for like a week or something. I don't know whether that's true, but that's what somebody was claiming on in some Instagram post. But it wouldn't surprise me. You know, Dolph Lundgren was a very big, powerful man. And Sylvester Stallone's like, what, 5'8", 5'9"? No, he was pumped full of roids, but so was Dolph Lundgren. Okay, so we got a Dubois fanboy here. He says, Dubois will KO Usyk and shut up the haters. He was robbed, and I guarantee Dubois will expose him again. Well, I've got no issue with anything you said other than this notion that he was robbed. He wasn't robbed. Unless you're an imbecile and don't understand the rules of boxing and what constitutes a low blow, then there's no way you'd be saying that he was robbed. He certainly wasn't robbed. It was a clear low blow. The WBA ruled it a low blow. If you have actually listened to what referees say, they say that the hip line, see some casuals who have seen that incident in the Usyk-Dubois fight, they seem to think that unless a punch lands literally in the testicles, then it's not a low blow. Okay? That's retarded. That's stupid. That is not what a low blow doesn't have to be literally in the testicles for it to count as a low blow. It simply has to be below the hip line. The majority of the glove has to be below the hip line. And that was certainly the case in the Usyk-Dubois fight. The majority of Dubois' glove was way below the hip line. That is a low blow. So all this, he was robbed, this is all Frank Warren silly propaganda, Don Charles idiocy. I mean, I wouldn't even mention Daniel Dubois because he's probably on the spectrum, so he doesn't know any better, respectfully. he's like a, excuse me, he's like a wind-up toy. So, yeah, if you think Dubois beats Usyk in a rematch, okay. Okay. I don't have any issue with somebody having that opinion. But as far as Dubois was robbed, that's a load of rubbish. It's just flat out untrue. Shout out to Count Drago. He says, how about Usyk versus Caballel? I find it interesting. Like I say, I think Usyk should retire. If he did fight Caballel, I guess it's an interesting fight. But the concern is, how interesting would Usyk find it, you know? He's only a human being. Once you've been in there and you've beaten the AJs and the Furies and an incumbent heavyweight champion in Dubois, how do you even get yourself up for fighting Ajit Caballel? A shout out to Count Drago for the super chat. Okay, I've missed the name, but somebody said that Fury has the best powers of recovery in boxing, period. Well, you could call it the best powers of recovery in the heavyweight division, but even that wouldn't be true. Because look at Oleksandr Usyk. He's been in there with monster punches like AJ and Dubois. Hasn't even hit the deck. Yeah, there was the controversial low blow. It was a low blow. If you're talking about headshots, Usyk has taken big shots from AJ, big shots from Fury, a few shots here and there from Dubois. Never come close to going down. So I don't know why people are still ranting and raving about how well Tyson Fury recovers when this little gap-toothed middleweight actually takes a shot better than he does. A guy who's like 40, 50 pounds lighter than him takes a shot better. So that should be the story. Not the fact that the biggest heavyweight in the division recovers pretty well from taking a shot. It's like, okay, yeah, that's good. And isn't he supposed to, the size of him, be recovering better than these tiny guys? I mean, so we do have the emergence of some Daniel Dubois fanboys. Interesting. A shout out to Ali for the super chat. He says, it's called BOV trait, Hatman. That's what a Talma has. Okay, I'll look that up. Whatever it is, a lot of youngsters have it nowadays, and they can relate to it in a Talma. Okay, this John guy is just trolling basically here. He doesn't actually have anything worthwhile to say. Gave him a chance, but you know, he's just talking rubbish. Talking rubbish. One says, yeah, Usyk's chin is great, but the fact he really gets hit flush on the button helps. Indeed it does. He's got a good chin when he needs it. Yeah, I got that guy out of here. He's gone. Non-boxing related. Many of you guys ask me if there are any other sports I watch other than boxing, and my answer is usually no. I watch a little bit of UFC here and there, very casually. But over the past couple months, I have been watching a little bit of NFL. And earlier on, I watched the Steelers get absolutely thrashed by the Chiefs. To be fair, the Steelers hung on for, I want to say, the first 3 quarters of the game. But in the fourth quarter, I think it was in the fourth quarter, they just got absolutely annihilated. Colbzilla says NFL is long too slow. I hear that, and I share your sentiment to some extent, but I like watching the highlights on the NFL channel because then it cuts out all the breaks in the game. So most weekends over the past few weeks, I've been watching the highlights of the games. The highlights will last for like between 10 and 15 minutes. But I did watch the full game today between the Chiefs and the Steelers. And Shade says the Chiefs finally had a dominant win. They've had loads of dominant wins. They have only lost 1 game all season, right? And Pat Mahomes, look, I'm no NFL expert, but I did watch NFL back in the 90s. I was a Giants fan, big fan of Lawrence Taylor. The 90s obviously was the era of Jerry Rice, Dan Marino, and people like that. That's when the 49ers were the top team for a long time. Anyway, Pat Mahomes is incredibly talented as a quarterback. Obviously, it's been a very long time since the 90s, so I haven't seen the development of the quarterback position during that period. But yeah, Mahomes is doing stuff I've never seen quarterbacks do. So yeah, Pat Mahomes, very, very talented. He's the quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs. Uh, 24 says Deion Sanders has 2 top prospect sons. Yes, so I've heard. A Shade says you missed my super chat though. My bad. Let me find it here. Okay. Shades shout for the super chat. He says, who performed better against Usyk, AJ or Fury? I gotta say Fury. Fury performed better. In terms of doing damage, at least. There's an argument to be made that perhaps AJ won more rounds against Usyk. There's that argument to be made, but, and this is the really weird one, right? AJ actually did better defensively against Usyk than Tyson Fury did in the first fight. Yeah, if you compare the punch stats for the first Usyk-AJ fight and the first Usyk-Fury fight, AJ actually gets hit less than Fury, which is a really damning indictment on Tyson Fury's defense because, again, he was sold as having this, Mayweather-like defense, which he never had. But yeah, the fact that AJ actually got hit less than him is crazy. Because AJ was supposed to be the big, stiff, docile bodybuilder, can't get out of the way of a punch. But he managed to get out of the way of more of him than Fury did. But yeah, I don't think offensively AJ was as effective against Usyk as Fury was. Fury was more effective offensively, certainly in the first fight. And physically, the first Fury fight was tougher than either of the AJ fights were for Usyk. Fury was able to make his presence felt more. Okay, interesting question from Jordan. He says, does Dubois have a solid chin? Or is he just riding high on confidence and momentum? Well, I don't think it's an either or situation. I think that confidence actually assists your punch resistance. Now, I'm not just talking about blind confidence or ignorance. I'm talking about the confidence that comes from coming through tough fights and coming through adversity. Daniel Dubois has done that against Jarrell Miller, against Filip Hrgović. So, and this is off the back of the defeat to Usyk, the previous defeat to Joe Joyce. So when you are more confident in your ability to come through tough fights, you're going to be more confident in taking a shot. And so, excuse me, when you get hit, physically, you're not going to react in such a negative way when you're full of confidence in your ability to come through bad patches. You see what I'm saying? A lot of taking a shot is psychological. A lot of it is physical as well. A lot of it is physical, but a large component of it is psychological. And that aspect for Daniel Dubois is very, very solid right now. Tekken says, if AJ can touch Usyk, Zhang definitely can. Yeah, that's an interesting one, you know? Zhang, big Chinaman, southpaw as well. His feet are slow as molasses, but he's got some boxing skills, little bit of hand speed, incredible punching power. Shade says, I disagree. AJ is quicker. Disagree with who? I don't remember saying anything about AJ being less quick than someone in this stream. Shade says, Zhang is the slowest heavyweight. He's definitely not. If he was the slowest heavyweight, he wouldn't have beaten Joe Joyce. Clearly a lot faster than Joe Joyce. He wouldn't have caught Wilder with all those shots. So no, Zhang's got pretty good hand speed for a man of his size. Shade says, the guy who said Zhang can land. Okay, I see what you're saying, Shade. You're responding to that guy. I see what you're saying. Afro Jam, big up. He says, Zhang is very explosive and sets traps and counters. He does indeed. He's sneaky, that Chinaman, you know. And he's got power in both hands. He's got legit one-punch knockout power in both hands. Remember, he knocked out Joyce in a rematch with a right hook. Wasn't even a southpaw backhand. It was a right hook up front. Shout out to Swaggins for the super chat. Because I know you don't do Christmas, but Merry Christmas. Okay, Partridge says, I think his right hook is better than his straight left. I struggle to split them, to be honest. They're both thrown with tremendous power. I mean, the straight left he hit Joseph Parker with. Remember the damage he did to Parker's face with that one punch? Crazy. I mean, Parker was fresh-faced before it landed. Didn't have a mark on him. As soon as he gets hit with that left hand from Zhang, he looks like he's done about 12 rounds. In a slugfest. Zhang's power is incredible in both hands. So if Partridge comes back, put him in against the winner of Zhang against Caballero. That's a good start. That's if he doesn't elect to take the AJ fight instead. Carlton Palmer, big up. He says Hrgovic has some chin because he took enough shots off Zhang and didn't go down. Indeed, Hrgovic's got a great chin. Great chin. John says, Hatman, who do you think wins out of Bacoli and Dubois? I think it's a very intriguing fight. I can see how Bacoli could win, but he's never been in there against a puncher like Dubois. Young, confident, a guy who's overcome alpha male bully types like Jarrell Miller and Filip Hrgovic. These are guys, well, Hrgovic and AJ were guys who had their way at certain points with Dubois in sparring. So Dubois, I don't think himself would be that worried about fighting Martin Bacoli, who apparently also had his way with him in sparring, because he's on a roll at the moment in terms of defeating his demons in the ring. So it's an interesting one. I might even lean towards Bacoli to win, but not by much. I could see it going either way. Shout out to JH for the super chat. He says, Hatman, do you put Fury in the top 15 heavyweights of all time? I know near impossible to judge, as many in the old days only weighed 85 to 90 kilos. No, I don't put him in the top 10. No. Because as I explained earlier, when I'm ranking a heavyweight or any fighter in any weight class in terms of all-time great status, I primarily judge it on their resume, not on who I think they could beat in a fantasy matchup, because that's too opinion-based. It's too subjective. I'm not saying I don't take it into account at all because of what you've just outlined there. If you go back far enough in the heavyweight division, some of these guys were only 85 to 90 kilos, like Rocky Marciano. But once you reach like the 1960s, you know, the Ali era, the 70s, those guys were big enough. They weren't big by today's standards, but they were big enough, as Usyk has just shown. So, no, I wouldn't rank Tyson Fury in the top 15 heavyweights of all time based on his resume. His resume, nowhere near good enough to be a top 15 heavyweight. I saw Simon Jordan incredibly the other day basically say that Tyson Fury beat a prime Klitschko, not the faded version of Klitschko that Joshua beat. You'd think that there were several years between those two fights and multiple fights that Klitschko had between those two fights. Actually, those fights were consecutive. They were next to each other. The AJ fight was the fight after Klitschko fought Fury. It was essentially the same version. The same guy. Tyson Fury beat a Klitschko who was one fight removed from retirement, or one fight away from retirement, should I say. That's the version of Klitschko he beat. The man, he was what, 38, 39? And it was a good win, but let's put it in context. It wasn't against the young Klitschko. It wasn't against the guy in his early 30s even. This was a guy in his late 30s who would only have one more fight and then retire. And then, other than that, who did he beat? Wilder? Was Wilder ever any good, really? Yes, we know he could punch, but he was so protected. They kept him away from Parker. They kept him away from AJ. He never fought Andy Ruiz when Ruiz was still useful. You know, Michael Hunter, Jarrell Miller, Dylan White even. I mean, Wilder was one of the most protected heavyweights I've ever seen. And so Tyson Fury, coming off a hiatus and massive weight loss, goes and fights Wilder because Wilder's people think that Fury is washed. And obviously he wasn't washed enough. Because he goes to a draw with Wilder. But because it was a draw, I think that's why Wilder went for the rematch, because he's thinking, this Fury guy can't punch. A few adjustments, I'll knock him out in the rematch. That's what Wilder was thinking. That's what his people were probably thinking. And Fury flipped the script on him. But the point is, Wilder will forever be an unproven fighter. Let's just put it that way. Who did Wilder ever beat? What was his best win? Ortiz? How good was Ortiz? Who did Ortiz beat? Do you know what I mean? It's like, yeah. And that is the entirety of Tyson Fury's resume. Beat Klitschko, who was on the brink of retirement, and beat Wilder, who was unproven. And that's it. What, Dylan White, who just got chinned by Povetkin? I mean, that's not top 15 material. Fury's talented. And in fantasy matchups, I might pick him over certain people, but that's all speculation, conjecture. You know, it's very subjective. A shout out to you for the super chat. JH. Are there any good movies coming out in 2025 that you guys know about? Any good movies? Luke says Wilder couldn't even KO Charlie Zelenoff. I remember that. Superman, I'm not interested in Superman. So I should put the caveat, apart from comic book films, I will watch the sequel to The Batman. I don't think that's coming out till 2026. Other than that, you know, the Marvel DC stuff, no thank you, it's not for me. Somebody says Sonic 3. Yeah, miss me with that. I like Jim Carrey and all, but nah. Blade, nah. I don't want to see a geriatric. I never liked the original Blades, and I certainly don't want to see a geriatric Wesley Snipes. No, thank you. They need to stop resurrecting these 1980s and 1990s actors who are like drawing pension in their 60s, 70s, 80s. Resurrecting them in their old franchises. It's so lame. What's this guy called? Through the Storm says, Hatman, did you watch Blade Runner 2049? Yeah, that was pretty good. Ryan Gosling did a good job. Obviously, Harrison Ford had a little cameo, which was inoffensive. It was okay, his cameo. Was a pretty good film. I saw both Dune films, which were far better than the original, by the way. Oh my God. The original Dune that came out in the 80s, one of the worst films that has ever been committed to film. Well, yeah, one of the worst movies ever committed to film. One of the worst things ever committed to film. Horrible. How that gained a cult following, I will never know. That film was beyond trash. So the remakes, not that they're perfect, Dune and Dune 2 are much better than the original that came out in the 80s. Okay, Mozart says only Star Wars. Yeah. Definitely ain't watching Star Wars no more. Mission Impossible, nah, it's not for me. Some tired old franchise, flogging a dead horse. It's like flipping Nightmare on Elm Street in the 90s, you know, or the 80s, 90s. They kept on doing Nightmare on Elm Streets. Or Fast and Furious films. Oh, it's like, no, there's too many, man. Okay, somebody says Nosferatu. What is that? What is Nosferatu? What is it and who's in it? If you're into horrors, I'm not really into horrors, to be fair. I mean, I thought that Smile was quite funny. The first film, Smile. I was entertained by it. Talking about horrors, that was entertaining. All right, we've got a comedian in the chat here. He says, Hatman, who's your favorite actor? Will Smith. He's one of my least favorite actors. Can't stand Will Smith. If he's in a film, I'll usually avoid it. Checkmate says Nosferatu is a horror film about Dracula. Okay, I think I saw the trailer for that. It did look somewhat interesting. Might check it out. If it's anything like the Dracula with God, what's the guy called now? Gary Oldman. It had that kind of vibe, you know, that kind of like gothic vibe to it. Because that was a good Dracula, you know, with Gary Oldman. So, yeah, I might check that out. It's not going to be a musical or anything, is it? Shout out to Adam Clark for the super chat. He says, I can understand why he thinks he beat Usyk. He apparently dominated every second of the first Wilder fight. Indeed. But he wasn't so salty after getting the draw in the first Wilder fight as he was losing to Usyk. A Deep Random Thinker says Frankenstein TBA. Somebody says, what do you think about Leo DiCaprio films? I've liked a lot of them. Gangs of New York is one of my favorite films. Jordanio says, is it because he's a simp or you don't like his acting? Primarily because I don't like his acting, but he's also a simp, so that's just the nail in the coffin, isn't it? For Will Smith. But I've never liked his acting other than when he was in Fresh Prince. I liked him in Fresh Prince. It suited him, you know, because he's like a corny, goofy kind of guy. Big ears and all that. He was funny in Fresh Prince. He was never my favorite character in Fresh Prince. I liked Jeffrey, the butler. He was my favorite character. But yeah, he was all right in Fresh Prince. But in terms of his movies, I've never liked Will Smith in movies, ever. And I've had the misfortune of seeing him in quite a few, you know, Bad Boys and what's the alien one that he did? The aliens. Not the one where he's alone with his dog. Much older one than that with the aliens. Independence Day. Saw him in Ali, and I've never liked Will Smith in movies at all. Never liked him as an actor, as a movie actor. Shade says, do you like Kevin Hart? Not really. I don't really find Kevin Hart funny. User guest says, man like Carlton. Yeah, Carlton was funny too. I like Carlton's character in The Fresh Prince. The character of Carlton. What's his name? Alfonso. Is it Ribera? I forget his surname now. He's Cuban, isn't he? The guy that played Carlton Banks. He was a great character. Shout out to Seth for the super chat. He says, if you could combine two boxers to create the perfect boxer, who would it be? Mine would be James Toney and Roy Jones. Mine would be, I don't know, Mike Tyson and Roy Jones. How about that? Orca says, are you excited for 28 Days Later? I guess you mean 28 years later. Not really. The original was good. The sequel was trash. And this trilogy film, I don't have high hopes for it. It's directed by the same guy, isn't it? Danny Boyle. Is his name Danny Boyle? Pretty sure his name's Danny Boyle. He also directed The Beach, which is a DiCaprio film. Sunshine, which was a sci-fi film. So I don't have high. I've seen the trailer for it, but how far are you going to push that concept? I don't like when they push the concept too far. And when they try to resurrect the franchise after decades, you know? Especially when it's the same director. Afro Jam says, Alfonso Ribeiro is actually of Trinidadian heritage. Oh, is he? How come he's got a Spanish name then? I know Trinidad was controlled by the Spanish at one point, but still with a Alfonso and Ribeiro. You sure he doesn't have some Latino background in there? I could have sworn he does. Seth says, Hackman, thoughts on the Avatar movies? I like the first one. Second one was trash. Mighty Meatball says, do you like Forrest Whitaker films? Okay. Last King of Scotland was cool. I thought Ghost Dog was corny. Some people liked it. Choice Adrian says he's half Cuban as well. Yeah, I thought he was. I could have sworn he was Cuban. So yeah, to me, it makes sense he'd be half Cuban with a name like that, because first and last name are both Spanish. Because I know some people, some Caribbean people that have Spanish surnames, but they've got like English first names, right? Because they don't actually speak Spanish, but somewhere down the line, you know, their ancestors were owned by Spanish people, plantation owners or whatever. But they've got English first names. Like most people from English-speaking Caribbean countries, they've got English first names. But when you've got a Spanish first name as well as a Spanish surname, now you have to have some type of Latino heritage there. Ahmed Musa says Creed films were entertaining. Not to me, they weren't. I thought they were horrible. I never liked that guy. You know, the one who played Creed. Thought he was cheesy. Never liked him. All right, 1 second here. Okay, somebody asked me, are you watching the Ravens game? Not currently. I may have a look at it. David says, I'm Trini and you sound like you clearly have some Caribbean heritage. Yes. I'm a Caribbean immigrant. There you go. Somebody says, what about Squid Game? Yeah, I like Squid Game. I think the second season is coming out tomorrow, right? SUV fella says, Jamaican like me? My cousin is Popcorn. Your cousin is Popcorn? Really? I'm from the 242. If you're really Caribbean, you should know what the 242 is. Okay, Mozart says, any opinions on Billy Carson? Not sure how those two are connected. Billy Carson, I actually did an episode about him a few months ago on my Patreon, and I described him as the new David Wilcock. Most of you probably don't know who David Wilcock is. David Wilcock is some American guy who got big on YouTube, I want to say a decade or more ago. And he was coming out making all sorts of colorful claims about ancient history and talking very loosely about, extraterrestrials in the ancient past and all this type of stuff, which I find very entertaining and interesting to listen to and consider. But I never took David Wilcock seriously. I never thought that his information's all going to be bang on. He was a showman to me. I put him in the same category as, the ancient aliens guys. It's entertainment. It's not like real scholarship. It's entertainment. You take it for what it is. It's like, sit down and eat popcorn and watch something lighthearted. And that's the way I see Billy Carson. He's entertainment. I don't see him as like a serious scholar. He's entertainment. He plays fast and loose with history and the truth and whatever. And I can see lately he's got himself into a spot of bother because some Christian scholar took him to task over certain points, certain misquotes he's been making about the Bible or whatever, or God knows what, which is quite funny. But yeah, Billy Carson very much reminds me of David Wilcock. He's like David Wilcock 2.0. Almost, very similar presentation, a very similar type of character on YouTube. There's David Wilcock, very, very similar. It's just that David Wilcock was a white American, Billy Carson's a black American, but very, very similar. And just like David Wilcock, Billy Carson has come a cropper. David Wilcock came a cropper as well. People started calling out some of his mistakes. Let's just be generous and call them mistakes. Some people started calling out some of his mistakes, and it all went badly wrong for David Wilcock about, a decade or so ago. Looney Classic says, why do British and black Americans look down on Africans? We are all black and should treat each other with respect. Well, it's a generalization there, of course. I certainly don't look down on Africans. In fact, with me, it's more so the opposite. I tend to look down more on Caribbeans and black Americans, even though I'm one of them. And I tend to gravitate more towards Africans, because I think their culture is, obviously there's many cultures in Africa, but in general, I just think their culture is more healthy overall, more conducive to producing solid communities, solid families, and so on, than Black American culture or even Black Caribbean culture for the most part. So I've always gravitated towards African people and African culture since I was, at least in my early 20s. Why do other people look down on them and whatever? I don't know, man. Just foolishness, ignorance. I don't know. But then again, it's like in Africa itself, you got all the tribalism, you know? Different tribes look down on other tribes, and that's also a problem. John Nielsen says, have you ever been to Scandinavia? No, never. I don't like the cold. I tend to go where it's hot. And the UK, too cold for me as it is. So I've always gravitated towards warmer climates. Faller Gates says blacks ain't Africans and black culture got destroyed by Africans, etc. during the slave trade. Blacks ain't Africans. We've done a DNA test. I think you'll find out they are. They absolutely are Africans. I know there's some alternative takes these days with the FBA and all that. Oh, we're indigenous to the Americas. I'm not dismissing the possibility that there might have been some Africans in the Americas pre-slavery, but the majority were taken over there on slave ships, mate. Don't get it twisted. If that's not the case, then explain why Black Americans are indistinguishable physically, phenotypically from West Africans and Central Africans. Because if you'd been living in the Americas for hundreds or thousands of years, because of the gene pool, you would have started looking physically distinct from other groups of Africans on the continent of Africa. But no, you can drop the average Black American into Nigeria or Congo and nobody would know that they're not from there. They look indistinguishable. The ones who are not mixed, obviously, they look indistinguishable. And if you do DNA tests on most Black Americans, you're going to find they can go to the specific region where their ancestors were from in Africa. So this notion that Black Americans ain't Africans is just fantasy. It's fantasy. President Brush says they do look different. No, they really don't. They really don't. Maybe you don't know that many Africans, but they really don't. Anthony Joshua is Nigerian. Some people have got like strange view of what most Africans look like with really extreme features. No, Africans have a variety of different features and phenotypes. But, you know, Deontay Wilder, drop him in Lagos and nobody would know that he's not indigenous. Most of the Black American football players, you know, drop them in West Africa, Congo, nobody would know they're not from there. They literally look exactly the same as the indigenous population. All right, got some donut here. He wants to be blocked. Get you out of here. You blocked the wrong person by mistake. I'm gonna get the right person here. Shout out to Harry for the super chat. He says, do you see Big John and Gareth going at it? Yeah, I saw that. Big John Fisher was very unhappy that Gareth A. Davis said that the Dave Allen fight was a robbery. He said, you're not welcome in my house and all this kind of stuff. I mean, that's a good thing, right? Who would really want to go to the Fisher household and be around, you know, Johnny Fisher Sr.? The guy's insufferable. So Gareth A. Davis has actually dodged the bullet there. Because you know he's not the kind of guy that can refuse an invite. So, and he was actually really pushing back against Johnny Fisher Sr. because he didn't really want to go to Johnny Fisher Sr.'s house. Shade says you can tell the difference between Somali and Ethiopian. Yeah, very easily. For the most part, very easily. You can tell the difference between an indigenous South African and a Nigerian very easily, right? And indigenous South Africans are a mix of Bantu, the Bantu phenotype, which originates in West Africa, and the indigenous Khoisan phenotype, which is native to Southern Africa. And they look very different. They're, you know, very light-skinned as black people go. They have kind of slanty eyes. They're small in stature. So the indigenous Southern Africans look very different. I mean, totally different. So let's say Nigerians or Ghanaians, totally different phenotype. Ocean Blue says the Fisher household must stink of soy sauce. I don't understand the whole Johnny Fisher Sr. thing, man. It's weird. A morbidly obese guy who's eating himself to death and documenting it in real time and people are cheering it on. It's actually quite sick. And he seems to think it's all, you know, very funny. The Afro Jam says they are not super light skinned though. Many of the Cape Colored now identify as Khoisan. Now, a lot of the Khoisan are super light skinned. So my girlfriend's family are originally Khoisan. So even though they were part of the Ndebele tribe, they were obviously people that were absorbed into that tribe. They were originally, because you know, when I spoke to her mum about her tribal background, she says she said these exact words. She said, "We're from the Bushmen. We're from the Bushmen." And the Bushmen is a term that the British used to describe the indigenous South Africans. And yeah, my girlfriend's mum, family, they're all very light-skinned Southern Africans, you know, Khoisan blood lineage. I mean, light-skinned as in, as light-skinned as a mixed race person. Very light. And they've all got those like, slit eyes and those facial features. Now I'm talking about the ones that actually still live in the bush. The ones who still live in the bush, loads of them are still very light, very, very light. Obviously, you know, living in the bush, you're going to get a little bit of a tan. It's hot in the bush, but you know, you take them out of the bush and you'll see how light they really are. They're very light and they're not mixed. The ones who live in the bush are, you know, pure-blooded. Their lineage goes back thousands of years. They didn't even mix with the Bantus or anything. Okay, shout out to Bobs for the super chat. He says, Zhang Joyce was mind-bogglingly bad matchmaking. Yeah, if you want to see it that way. Ross Kemp says, the Khoisan are technically not black. Okay, that's complete nonsense. That's complete nonsense. I've heard some Afrikaners claim that the Khoisan are not black. No, they are black. If you are an indigenous person of the African continent, then you are obviously black. It's just that some people can't seem to comprehend the fact that there isn't one black phenotype or genotype, that actually black Africans have a wider genetic diversity than all the other races on the planet combined. Look it up. I'm not making it up. You look that up. So there's massive phenotypical diversity among black Africans. So for example, the Nilotic people in southern Sudan, northern Uganda, they look very different, for example, to Nigerians. Like Igbo Nigerians do not look like Nilotic people of southern Sudan, who are extremely dark-skinned, very tall, hairless, usually they can't grow facial hair, can't grow body hair, and stuff like that. Very tall. A lot of basketball players have come out of there. So their phenotype is very different. They tend to be skinny. They're not that muscular. Whereas with West Africans, they're more muscular. They've got different head shapes. They're usually lighter, or they come in lighter skin tones than Nilotic people, and so on. So yeah, the notion that the Khoisan are not black is like some, it's ridiculous. The Khoisan are actually the oldest genetic type in existence on Earth right now. That's what genetic studies have revealed. So the Khoisan were there before any of the other phenotypes in Africa or any of the phenotypes in Europe or Asia. Yeah, their lineage goes back very, very far in terms of being, you know, not mixing with other groups. And so, yes, they have a different genetic profile to, let's say, Bantu Africans, but that doesn't mean they're not black Africans, because they've been on the continent. You know, they have a genetic profile which is older than Bantu Africans, but they've been there the whole time in Africa, you know, so on. So yeah, they've been isolated basically, as Afrojam says. They've been isolated for like 9,000 years. I think it's longer than that actually. But they're just a particular type of black African that is genetically different from other types. Ali says, most Sudanese are mixed with Arabs, called Arabized Nubians. The genocide in Darfur. Yeah, I think a lot of, to be honest, a lot of Sudanese have got an identity crisis. Because I've seen Sudanese who are blacker than me. I mean, you know, you could easily mistake them for a Ugandan, and they'll turn around and tell you they're not black. It's like, who are you kidding? Go to Saudi Arabia and tell the Arabs that you're Arab and see what they say. They'll laugh at you. Some of them Sudanese have got, you know, identity issues. It's like some of these Latinos, you know, they're like black Latinos who are brown skin, Afro hair, everything. And they'll look you dead in your face and they'll be like, I know black. I Latino. I'm like, what? Yeah, there's a lot of that. Rich Franklin says some of them want to be Arab so bad. Yeah, they do. And again, that's the funny thing. Arabs never claim Sudanese as Arabs. You know that? I lived in the Middle East. They use the word actually, Sudani. This is the word that Arabs use as a pejorative term for black people in general. If they want to insult a black person, they'll call them Sudani. Sometimes they'll call them Abid, which means slave, or they'll call them Sudani. So Arabs don't claim Sudanese as Arabs. It's only the Sudanese themselves who think they're Arabs. Nobody else thinks they are, but there you go. Wow. This is a deep one. Berserker says, Hatman, my girlfriend told me that she wants AJ to blow her back out. So I dumped her. I've kind of hated AJ ever since. Well, that was a good move. Getting her the hell up out of there. Very good move. You know, I've always said if you have a girlfriend who's always like gushing about male celebrities, then she's not the one, bro. She's for the streets. Yeah. The only man she should be gushing about is you. If she's constantly gushing about male celebrities, nah. She's for the streets. Glad Tidings says there's only one race, the human race, with different tribes. Well, that's certainly how they saw it in the ancient world. They didn't really have the concept of, you know, this overarching concept of race. They saw themselves as like tribes and nations and stuff like that, more so than being part of some larger racial group. For the most part, that's how they tended to see things then. And again, in the Bible, it's about tribes and nations, isn't it? Afro Jam says, doesn't matter because tribes still go to war and have conflict. It's part of human life. Mm-hmm. Yeah, tribes love fighting each other, as is the case in Africa today, right? The tribes just can't stay off each other's necks. You know, in Africa, people don't care about, you know, you being the same race as them. They want to know what tribe you're from. You're not their brother unless you're from their tribe. I'm generalizing here, but that's how it is in a lot of Africa is like that. It's all about tribe. Their loyalty is to their tribe, not to any race, not to their wider race. You're like, most Africans are not Pan-Africanists at all. They don't believe in all that. That's why so many of these black Americans who go over to Africa thinking that Mother Africa is going to roll out the red carpet, and Africans will look at you like you're crazy. They don't know nothing about your history of enslavement and civil rights, nor do they care, most of them. They don't care. They've got their own history and their own tribal stuff and their own culture, and that's what they're immersed in. Some of these tribal beefs in Africa go back centuries, still raging. Looney Classic says, I am Shona like Derek Chisora. Can someone tell him I need a visa and sponsorship? Okay, Dogs B says, Hatman, opinion on racial segregation. Do you mean like forced segregation? Yeah, I definitely don't agree with forced segregation at all. Apartheid and stuff like that, I don't agree with that at all. You what, mate, says, Hatman, how was your Christmas dinner? I don't have Christmas dinner. I don't celebrate Christmas. Dog says, forced segregation so we can live on our own. Well, you can live on your own anyway. Most people segregate of their own accord. You don't need to force anyone to do it. You go to any city and neighborhoods tend to be segregated on racial or cultural or, so on. National lines. There's no need to start, bringing laws in to make sure people can't socialize of different races. The dog says we can't. They have forced us to do it. No, they haven't. I mean, if you're talking about mass immigration, that's a different issue. If you're talking about, people choosing to live in communities, making the conscious decision to live in communities among their own, that's all over the world, right? People do that in Britain. People do that all over Africa, in America. People do it of their own accord. Generally, birds of a feather flock together. People prefer to live among their own. Most people, the majority of people. So that's what they do. The dog says they have purposely destroyed my land. Well, they've purposely destroyed a lot of lands, right? They purposely destroyed America. The natives got genocided. They purposely destroyed Australia. New Zealand, South Africa was destroyed for a long time and is still trying to recover from what was done to it. And yes, there's mass migration into Europe, which is problematic for the indigenous Europeans. It's a problem worldwide. It's called globalism, right? Okay, Dungus says, I'm Sudanese, and Hatman, I'm speaking some truth about the identity crisis in Sudan. I would say most Sudanese identify as Black Africans. Okay. If you're talking about South Sudanese, well, obviously, yes. But if you mean like, quote unquote, North Sudan, I guess it's the Republic of Sudan, however it's described as a country. Many of them, from what I've seen, do not, but I'll take your word for it. Dog says, I agree with Hungary and Poland, but they have destroyed my land. Well, Hungary and Poland are not imperialist. They haven't involved themselves in those conflicts in the Middle East, have they? So why should they take anyone in when they didn't participate in creating the refugee crisis? So I agree with them too. They don't have to take anyone in. They didn't create the problem. And that should be a lesson to anyone, right? If you don't want your country to get changed in terms of the demographics, then always oppose your government when they want to start participating in imperialist action. Because the result will inevitably be you'll end up with the people from the countries you're invading in your country. So I agree with Hungary too. You know, they haven't partaken in any of the conflicts. They haven't invaded anyone in the Middle East. So why the hell should they be taking people in? I agree with them. SUV fella says Bantus were colonizers. Well, yeah, they were colonizing only within their own continent. The same way that certain Mesoamerican civilizations were colonizing within the Americas. The way the Japanese were colonizing within East Asia. So yeah, you know, wherever you go in the world, even the Russians were imperialist within Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and so on. The Romans were colonizers, right? Even within Europe. But when it's people of the same quote unquote race, colonizing other people of the same race, it tends not to have such a, it's still bad, but it tends not to have such a terrible impact because, you know, the way human beings are, the more different you look phenotypically, the more hostile they're going to be towards you in an imperialist situation. So when people look more similar to the people that are conquering them, there tends to be more assimilation, like with the Brits, you know, being conquered by the Romans and so on. And they're not as resentful over the fact they got conquered because they look the same as the people who conquered them, or look very similar, you know? So Brits today tend to speak, you know, without much hostility about the Romans. Yeah? In fact, they speak quite favorably about them for all the things that the Romans introduced to Britain, all the technology and so on and so forth. Looney Classic says the Bantus did not segregate the San people, they just asked for tribute. Yeah, the Bantus were basically trying to unite the peoples of Southern Africa because they knew what was coming. So they were basically doing what Saddam did, what Saddam tried to do with the Arabs. Yeah, Saddam tried to unite them all, and the ones who didn't want to unite, well, he threatened them. That's what Saddam did. He tried to unite them, and when they didn't want to play ball, he was like, okay. SUV fella says, wrong, they butchered them, ha ha. Okay, you sound like you're trolling. No, the Bantus did not butcher the people of Southern Africa the way you've described. You're basically trying to say they genocided them, which they didn't do. And the proof that they didn't do it is because they have mixed with them to such an extent that the blacks of Southern Africa today, the majority of, or a large proportion of them, have clearly got Bantu and indigenous Khoisan blood in them. You can see by their phenotype. So sounds like Afrikaner propaganda that you're coming out with there. Now, obviously, you know, the Zulus and, you know, the Bantus would have killed indigenous, you know, Khoisan and so on when they were trying to persuade them to be part of their empire. Of course, there's going to be some resistance and some of them wouldn't want to do it. And there would have been some killing going on. But in terms of like, you know, they just went down there to genocide them all. And that's a load of rubbish. Because they mixed with them. They married them. They interbred with them. That's what the blacks in South Africa are a result of. The mixture between the Bantu and the indigenous Khoisan population. Afro Jam says the Khoi and the San are they were two different groups, but now they're referred to as the Khoisan because there's so few of those groups left that they are effectively just one group now. SUV fella says, like Ugandans did Hutus and Tutsis. Bro, the Bantus were brutal. Okay, the Hutus and Tutsis are not Ugandans. They're from Rwanda. And Bantus are... I mean, Bantu is such a broad term which could apply to so many people. You're acting like they're a tribe or something. The Bantus are not a tribe. You're basically talking about an umbrella term which is used to describe Africans of many, many different tribes, which originally in deep antiquity, thousands of years ago, are said to originate from West Africa and are said to have then spread out through Africa and then became various other tribes in different parts of the continent. They were not like some unified group. You're talking about over the course of thousands of years. Okay, SUV fella is talking absolute bollocks at this point. He sounds like an apologist for colonialism in Africa. That's what he sounds like. Dear oh dear, that's all he is. I'm trying to have a reasonable conversation, but man just seems to be pushing some type of agenda. I bet he's an Afrikaner. I bet that's what he is. That's why he's coming out of all that stuff. You know, that's what they tend to do is in order to justify what was done by the Afrikaners to the indigenous Southern Africans, they'll say, oh, the Bantus were murderous killers and this and that. And, you know, to try and absolve themselves of any responsibility, like give it a rest. Glad Tidings says, Hatman, have you ever been to Botswana? Really good people. I haven't. Haven't been to Botswana, but I'm a little hesitant about Botswana because just like South Africa, there's a lot of like this liberalization going on down there, which I'm really not a fan of. Where they're pushing certain agendas down there. If I was to go Southern Africa, I'd sooner go Zimbabwe, even though the country's economically in the, in the doldrums. They're at least sticking to their traditional principles. Whereas Botswana, South Africa, it's getting very, very quote unquote westernized down there. Yeah, South Africa is a write-off as far as I'm concerned in terms of like the westernization and all that. Terrible, terrible in South Africa. That place is a write-off. Do not go to South Africa looking for a wife at all. The last place in Africa you should go looking for a wife is South Africa. Yeah, they got nice looking women down there, but nah, mate, that's not the place. So for me, somewhere like Zimbabwe, Tanzania, one of these more traditional countries where they don't play any of that funny business. Shout out to Justin. Taku says soon they'll see South Africans in bonnets identifying as G neutral who was born a man. I'm sure that's already there. I'm sure they're already doing that in South Africa. Like South Africa is just so effed up with all the leftist, Western liberal stuff that they've implemented in that country. No, thank you. Not for me. Uganda's even all right. Uganda, they're still traditional there. They're not playing any of the funny business. Glad Tidings says Kenya is nice too. Kenya's they're getting a bit liberal there. In Kenya, they're getting a bit liberal there. There's some city girl attitude in places like Nairobi and whatever. About Kenya, man. I would certainly prefer Uganda, Tanzania, Zimbabwe. Dog says, Hatman, you're getting like that yourself. And I will refer to your middle name in terms of what you just said there. BOLLOCKS. Talking rubbish. Black Dynamite says Kenya and Rwanda are one of them countries that push whatever the agenda is. Yep, I can see that. I can see that. Okay, you seem like pathological at this point. What's your name on Patreon? You say you want to message me on Patreon. Tell me your name on Patreon. Tell me your Patreon username if you're going to message me. What's your name? No. Tell me your username. Tell me your username on Patreon. Man shook. Scared to death, scared to look. Don't want to tell me his username. Tell me your username. Scared to death, scared to look. Shook. No. Don't message me. Tell me your username. Loads of people message me. I don't even check the messages most of the time. Tell me your username. Unless you're scared to death, scared to look. Shook. Because you've been talking the most amount of nonsense on here, and I'm being reasonable. so do me the courtesy of telling me your username on there. Don't be shook. Zoo says too many Christmas shandies for my man. Seems like that, innit? Man has lost all his reason. See, I'm a man of reason. A reasonable man. I could be reasoned with. When someone just starts talking rubbish, because my man's been talking rubbish and then accusing me of what he's doing, give it a rest. And talking nonsense. Waved says, Hatman, what do you think? Why do you think a lot of the younger generation are getting addicted to watching PORN? A lot, it was never a problem for us. Well, because relations between male and female have gone down the toilet over the past 20 years in Western countries. So you're getting a growing number of young males who are invisible to the opposite, invisible to women, and they can't get none. So what would you expect? Of course, they're gonna turn to various websites and OnlyFans and all this other stuff. That's where we're at with it, unfortunately. It's sad the way they've engineered things to make it so difficult for young males in the modern world. And it has been engineered that way. They've weaponized things against young males with the prefix of toxic before masculinity, right? Very sad. Louis Mensa says, I'm 21. It's actually horrible dating girls. Yeah, I feel for young guys nowadays. Because in my day, it was a joy. Before all this internet stuff, before all this social media stuff, I feel privileged to have lived in a time when, I was able to experience dating before social media and what have you existed. It was so much better. So much better. Nova says, any advice for us Hatman? I'm 22. It feels hard finding your place in the world and experiencing these things now. Get out of the West. Same advice I give to everyone. Get out of the West. Peter Hitchens has been telling young people to leave Britain for decades. I think he wrote a book about it. Because things are going to get so bad, particularly for young people. Don't waste your life dealing with all the nonsense that they're foisting upon you. Get out of the West. Leave. There's a whole big world out there. You don't have to put up with all the nonsense. Berserker says, Hatman, have you ever been to Notting Hill Carnival? Loads of times back in the day. I grew up going to Notting Hill Carnival. Dungus says, when did you leave the West, Hatman? I left in, was it 2022? 2022. Matthew says, how can Usyk save boxing when it's split decisions all the time and no KOs? He saved boxing from Tyson Fury. That's what he saved it from. No KOs. He stopped Daniel Dubois. Guess you forgot about that. Shout out to Khalid for the super chat. He says, my favorite Fury performance is Wilder 1. What's yours? My favorite Fury performance is Wilder 2. Yeah, Wilder 2 is my favorite performance. Because it was so surprising. You know, I certainly didn't expect him to box that way. I know he said he would, but Tyson Fury says a lot of stuff and then doesn't do it. But on that occasion, he did actually follow through on what he said he was going to do. And it was a great performance because it was the total opposite of the performance in the first fight. Matthew keeps on saying, any heavyweight can go 12 rounds with Usyk. I don't know the point you're making. I guess you're missing the point that I made. Tyson Fury was a terrible influence on the heavyweight division because he was not living up to the reputation that he tried to create for himself as, I'll fight any man born from his mother. And I'm cut from the same cloth as John L. Sullivan. And, you know, he was coming out of all this rhetoric like he was an old school throwback fighter that will fight anyone, any man, anytime, any place. He'll run through the heavyweight division. And he was never that guy. Ever since he came back in 2018, his whole MO was about conning people. Rather than just going for the jugular and taking the biggest fights against the biggest names back to back to back to back. No. He tried to con people all the time. He could have fought AJ when he came back in 2018. How about that? He could have made the fight then. And if it was such an easy fight for him, maybe it would have been. But if he thought it was such an easy fight, he should have gone and done that, fought AJ, then go fight Wilder. AJ was the bigger star. He had more belts. Why not do that? See, with Fury, it's always about trying to con people every step of the way. He actually tried to freeze AJ out. You guys remember that? Yeah, he tried to freeze AJ out and convince the public that the other belts didn't matter. Frank Warren was saying, Fury versus Wilder, this is the two best heavyweights in the world. The other guy doesn't count. You think that's good for boxing? It's terrible for boxing. In 2020, there's a video clip, which I talked about earlier on in the stream, of Tyson Fury talking about how he's not interested in fighting Usyk because he doesn't speak English. And we need to keep boxing, we need to keep the heavyweight belts in the Anglosphere. That's what Fury was saying in 2020. So he gave you a heads up that he was going to avoid Usyk for a good couple years, which is what he did. He kicked the can down the road. He tried to age Usyk out. He hoped that somebody like Dubois or another mandatory would take him out. But in the meantime, the public turned against Tyson Fury. That, combined with the fact that the Saudis made him an offer he couldn't refuse, eventually forced his hand. That is what Oleksandr Usyk saved the heavyweight division from. All that nonsense. All that carry on. Tired of it. See, those of us who have been critical of Tyson Fury, that's the reason we're tired of all his BS, man. Sick and tired of it. All his messing about. Oleksandr Usyk came along and he was old school. No messing about. He was going from top fighter to top fighter to top fighter to top fighter once he stepped up and beat AJ. And that's how we want our heavyweight champions to move. So all this stuff about, oh, Usyk doesn't score knockouts, well, whatever. He beat the guy who was destroying the heavyweight division through his cynical conduct. Guys like that are no good. Matt saying split decisions. Well, he should have been unanimous decisions. Split decisions because there's a lot of pro-Fury bias in the boxing industry. And he's only had 2 split decisions. In the second AJ fight, that was a joke. Should have been unanimous. And in the first Fury fight, that was a joke too. Should have been unanimous. I guess you're a Fury fanboy. Get you out of here. See, I don't mind people disagreeing, folks. I just want people to be reasonable. I'm a man of reason. You come with a view I don't agree with, that's okay. Just be reasonable. If you're just coming with some fanboy vibes, that's not reasonable. I can't respect somebody coming with fanboy vibes. Therefore, I'll treat you with the contempt that you deserve. Don't come at me with no fanboy vibes. Is Oleksandr Usyk the most exciting heavyweight in the history of the sport? Of course he's not. But he's an old school throwback who's willing to fight the best, and he's not trying to mess about. I mean, Muhammad Ali wasn't the most exciting heavyweight in the history of the sport, but he took boxing through the stratosphere in terms of popularity. Oh, yes, he did. But you watch most Muhammad Ali fights, they're not great fights. Truth be told, they're not great fights. And speaking of Muhammad Ali, Oleksandr Usyk shares the same birthday as Ali, same height, same weight, same reach. It's crazy, right? They say that history don't repeat itself, but it rhymes sometimes. And I think that's an example of it. History rhyming. Shout out to Ray Carl Brown Amori for the super chat. He says, for me, heavyweights fight. Fury duck and dive, pulled out of fights. He didn't want to face Usyk because he would get outboxed. Plus, he couldn't play mind games. Exactly that. Exactly that. See, some people have the impression that those of us who are critical of Tyson Fury are just doing so because we have some type of personal issue with him, you know, for some reason other than boxing, which is just nonsense. Early on in Tyson Fury's career, I was praising him, you know, the most. When he beat Klitschko, I was praising him the most. As I've always said on my channel, no fighter is below praise, and no fighter is above criticism. So Tyson Fury back in the days was a fighter I praised a lot. But as soon as he started messing about, obviously I had to start criticizing him because he became bad for boxing. It's just that simple. The guy could be an awful human being and somebody I detest as a person, but if they conduct themselves in the arena of boxing with pure intent, they're not ducking and diving and they're just going for the best fights all the time as a champion, then I'm going to praise them for their boxing conduct. Maybe as a personal, in their personal life, they're a scumbag. I can separate the two things. The same goes for a fighter who I might think is cool as a person. If they don't conduct themselves the way I would expect a champion to conduct themselves in terms of taking the fights they should be taking, I'm going to criticize them. I'm going to be on their neck. It's just that simple. Shout out to 1-1 for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And as Ray said there, Fury kicked the can down the road for over 2 years with Usyk because he knew what was coming. Simple. He knew what was coming. He knew that his little circus and his fun and games and messing about and having trilogy fights with Chisora and Francis Ngannou and all this carry on, he knew all that would come to an end if he fought Usyk. So he was trying to push that as far off into the distance as possible. Hold Usyk off for as long as possible and hope that somebody else beat him in the meantime. And if I'm lying, then go and have a look at that video from 2020 where Tyson Fury is literally saying that he's got no interest in fighting Usyk and that the heavyweight titles need to stay within the Anglosphere. He said it out of his own mouth. He was already thinking about freezing Usyk out even then. Because the interviewer asked him, what if Usyk beats AJ? Any interest in fighting Usyk then? He said, no interest in fighting him. He doesn't speak English. This is what Fury said. Okay, DB, you seem like you are either drunk, talking about dogs be genius, you seem like you're either drunk or you're pathological in some way, because you do realize I'm literally doing a live and you're asking me to check messages on Patreon and messages on Element. I'm doing a live. Are you blind? Like, what's wrong with you? I'm doing a live. What's wrong with this guy? No, I didn't say for you to message me. You said that you're going to message me. I never asked you to message me. I said, tell me what your name is. I never said message me. I'm literally doing a live. You think I'm going to stop my live to go and check I don't give a damn about your message. You've been talking rubbish the whole chat. Why would I be so desperate to go and check what your message is when you've been talking rubbish in here? Idiot, man. That's getting all pathological. Black Dynamite says, whenever Bacoli, Joyce, or Zhang performed well, they were branded as the next AJ Killer. However, matching those guys up with Fury was seen as damn near blasphemous. You know, Zhang is the most dangerous guy for 4 or 5 rounds in the heavyweight division, probably right now. Because as long as he's got gas in his tank, Zhang is a problem. Telling you, that guy's a problem when he's got gas in his tank. And I mean a problem for anyone. Because of the power he's got in both hands and his boxing skills, he's a problem for anyone in the first 4 or 5 rounds. Glad Tidings says, Hatman, what do you think is the next great empire to rise? Is it China? Depends what you mean by empire. You know, empires of the future might look quite different to the empires of the past. But it would appear as though the sun is very much rising in the east. You know, the red sun is rising in the east, for sure. In the factory of the world with their enormous workforce and their ability. I mean, have you seen those videos on Instagram of Chinese kids and what they teach them in school? And how, like, I mean, they've got Chinese kids doing bricklaying when they're about 5. You know, like fixing cars and, I mean, crazy. You compare some of these like young Chinese kids to Western kids, it is night and day. They're being prepared for the adult workforce when they're in primary school. And they're preparing well. Do you know what I mean? It's like, yo. They're all coordinated in the stuff they're doing in their classes. They got all the same uniforms. You know, I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. They've got all the technology now there, the drone technology, all the big brother technology. I mean, it's it's ominous, you know, it's ominous. JH, how about you tell Tyson Fury to give Usyk some credit? Don't comment on air telling us to give Fury credit until your guy has given Usyk some credit. How about that? Let's start there. Because he's given Usyk no credit. The man who beat him twice. He hasn't given him a shred of credit. Tell your guy, give Usyk some credit, then we can have the discussion. Until then, leave it out. Shout out to Dan the Man for the super chat. He says, who would win? Prime Canelo or Prime? All right, you caught me off guard with that question. Prime Canelo or Prime Dave Allen? Excuse me. Prime Canelo on points. Yeah, Canelo. I think he could outpoint Dave Allen. I think Dave Allen is limited enough for a small guy like Canelo to just outbox him. I don't think he'd need to bulk up to heavyweight, you know? I think he'd just come in like 175 or something, 180 and fight Dave Allen and just outbox him in a 10-rounder. Could probably do that. He spars with, or he has sparred in the past with Frank Sanchez. They didn't look like they were going all out, but Matthew Clark says, did you watch Charles versus Pulev Hatman? Crazy to think they're still about. WBA still a disgrace. I watched about 2 rounds of it and turned it off. That was horrible. 2 rounds was too much, you know. Awful. Awful. All right, ladies and gents, I'm going to turn this one in. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining me on this live stream. I hope you're having a great day, enjoying your time off work. If you are off work, if you're at work, try and enjoy yourself too. And yeah, continue to make the most of the festivities, time with family, and what have you. Catch you guys on the next one. Special shout out to everybody who donated via Super Chat. I'm out.